Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here again with you and that you all came to hear another Zoom webcast by the Liebling Research Center. So we are broadcasting every week subjects that are dealing with urbanity, with conservation, with architecture, in order to provoke a discourse about what's going on today. And I'm very excited to have two very honored guests with me. Perhaps my personal most appreciated architects from Israel, Professor Zvi Efrat, and from Germany's Matthias Sauerbruch, Professor Matthias Sauerbruch. So first of all, thank you for joining me. The Liebling House is a center of the Tel Aviv municipality, Tel Aviv-Jaffa municipality of the engineering department, together with the Federal Ministry of Building and Interior Building and Community, the German Federal Ministry of Interior Building and Community. And we are very happy to do this bilateral kind of dialogue, as we ourselves are a center that is kind of a fusion between Germans and Israelis. The Liebling House is open to the public. We're going to have new exhibitions and some public program. So whoever's in Israel watching us, please come and join us soon. And today we're going to focus on the epidemic session that we're in right now. So I'll first introduce you to our speakers. Matthias Sauerbruch founded Sauerbruch Hutton together with Louisa Hutton in 1989. Matthias has taught from 1985 to 1990 at the AA and has held a professorship at the TU Berlin as well. He's a member of the American Institute of Architects, an honorary fellow, and a member of the Academy of Fine Arts in Berlin. And of course, he has a lot of other honorary memberships in other institutions, but he's most famous for his practice. His architecture office is noted for its synthesis of color in the design process and for the use of fluid curvilinear forms. The firm's architecture is also known for its technical innovation and environmental sustainability. And I'm very pleased that Professor Sauerbruch, that you are here with us today. Also, I'm happy to say that we have met before and you have visited the Liebling House. So it would be also interesting for you to tell us what you thought about Tel Aviv and the Liebling House, as your visit to Israel was just before the whole Corona started. But I want to first, before you start your presentation, also introduce our other speaker, a colleague of yours, Professor Zvi Efrat, an architect and architectural historian, and he was the head of the Department of Architecture at the Bezalel Academy of Arts and Design in Jerusalem. And he has taught at the Technion, at the Tel Aviv University, Hebrew University, among others. He's also lectured worldwide and published extensively in various periodicals, and his book, The Object of Zionism, was published just recently. So I think the interesting thing about the conversation today is that it's a conversation between two colleagues, two pals really, that know each other and will speak to us about the situation and how they face it from Germany on one side and Berlin and Israel, Tel Aviv on the other. So if you can please start, Matthias, and present your office in a few slides so everybody will get to know what you're doing and has a little bit of background for this conversation. Thank you.
Sharon, before we continue, you should really mention, first of all, Louisa Hutton. Matthias is a partner, and Mira Kowalski, my partner.
That's true.
It goes without saying, of course.
Yes, so there's always a woman behind the man. That's a good thing to mention. Thank you.
Not behind. In my case, it's the man behind the woman.
Yes.
Yeah.
We will have another talk about that. I think that's a very interesting topic for another conversation.
Anyway, Sharon, thank you very much for your kind introduction. And Zvi, hi, very nice to see you again. I mean, Zvi
Yes.
was the most gracious host to us in Israel when we were visiting at the beginning of the year. We had a wonderful time. He showed us fantastic pieces of architecture, which left a deep impression on us. And I've been reading your book on and off ever since, actually. Corona gives you time to read, so there was plenty of opportunity. Now, Sharon, I have to admit that I haven't really prepared a presentation, and somehow this wasn't really very well communicated to me within the office, and I have to be a little bit spontaneous now. You said you would like to see maybe the very first project that we've done in Berlin, and the very last project that we've been working on, and I'm gladly going to show you that. And you just have to be a little patient with me, just a second.
Sure. Zvi, maybe you want
just to break the silence here.
Yes.
Maybe, Matthias, it's better this way, because instead of just an expose, you know, the usual expose of projects, more and more projects from your portfolio, and of course, beautiful buildings, maybe you can dwell, or we can discuss really the meaning of this first project and last project, and really contextualize them both historically and in the physical urban fabric, but also environmentally. So just to give the project greater significance.
So I'll share the screen with you. So the very first project that we were working on in Berlin was this competition that we won in 1991, very early 1991. It was the so-called GSW headquarters, an office building for a house.
Matthias, I think you're stuck.
This building in the center here.
I'm sorry, Matthias, we didn't hear your last sentence. And also, if you
can you see the mouse? Can you see that?
Yes, but if you can on your PowerPoint presentation do the slideshow, that would be helpful.
Sorry, do the slideshow. What does that mean?
So we see only the slide that you want to talk about, if it's possible. If not, that's okay as well.
What do you see at the moment?
We see the whole presentation.
Ah, I see. Okay, that's not intended. Sorry.
Yes, that's good.
That's good now?
No.
No, that's not good, no?
No. Maybe
how about that?
Just double click the image you want to show.
Is that good? You see
it doesn't
something?
matter. Let's leave it like that.
Okay. Anyway, so we were extending an existing building that was built right after the war. It was meant to be a headquarters for a printing house for a newspaper editor in what at the time was still called Kochstrasse. And Kochstrasse was the sort of Fleet Street of Berlin before the war. And so this was a kind of reconstruction effort, which went badly wrong because it was completed in early 1961. And as you all know, in August 61, the wall was built. So the building was kind of like right up against the wall, and it became a kind of major player, if you like, in the Cold War. There was a kind of, as you can see, sort of messaging board, or what was a messaging board at the time, mounted on top of it, so the messages could be somehow blasted across to the east. Now, our proposition was to make an addition to this building. I mean, at the time, this is 1990, this was at the end of the IBA period. IBA is the International Building Exhibition in Berlin, which was all about the so-called critical reconstruction of the historic fabric. We are in the middle of what's called Friedrichstadt, which is pretty much the center of Berlin. This is the southern part of Friedrichstadt, which ended up being in the west, and the northern part, which is Mitte, was then a part of the east. And of course, the debate in around IBA was all around the kind of continuity of European typologies, both in terms of urbanism and also in terms of architecture. So it was all about the block as far as Berlin is concerned. This is an introduction. There was a discussion that was introduced by Oswald Matthias Ungers in the 70s already, following on from Aldo Rossi's book on the Architettura della Città, the kind of continuity of European typologies in the kind of development of the contemporary city. And he was very
much, Matthias, if I may, as a critique to the first IBA of the 50s.
Very much against the first IBA of the 50s, exactly. Absolutely, yes. I mean, the IBA of the 50s, the Hansa, so-called Hansa Viertel, was a kind of small piece of modernist planning right next to the Tiergarten, the Central Park in Berlin, a piece of landscape urbanism, if you like, with kind of freestanding object towers and so on and so forth. So, I mean, this building here, the GSW, it was originally called das Grafische und Gewerbezentrum, the graphic business center, if you like. You can see a photograph of the time here. As I said, it was meant to be a printing facility. The low-rise is meant to be a factory where newspapers would be printed, and the tower is meant to be an administration tower. Was also kind of designed in that spirit of the modernist city, of the car city, of the kind of free-flowing space between object buildings. But it remained the only one of those typologies in the midst of a ruinous field of essentially pieces of urbanism that go back to the 18th and 19th century. So this is a photograph of the time when we were doing the competition. And yeah, to come back to this kind of diagram and drawing, what we were proposing is to pick up elements, if you like, of different periods that were sort of had left traces in this on that site and in that area. Namely, the kind of 18th century scale, which is more 3-story buildings with mansard roofs. So that, in a way, is what's being picked up by this horizontal building, that is ground scraper, if you like, that is following the line of the block, even though it's kind of bending in a little bit towards the entrance. And there's this kind of, what on this diagram is a green object, which we call the pillbox lovingly, is coming up to the scale of the 19th century, which is the 21-meter line in Berlin. That was the building rule, that buildings could not be, the parapet could not be higher than 21 meters due to fire regulations. And then finally, a kind of new building that's flanking this kind of 1950s tower, that with its kind of aspiration of, Berlin being a kind of new modern center of Europe and all of that before the wall was built. And this is what it looks like actually today. And so that's one story, is this kind of repair of the city, the city as a palimpsest of different kind of layers of historical ideas about the city and its urbanism, its architecture. And the second story, and Zvi was already hinting at it, is to do with sustainability. The building is most noted for this colorful west facade, which in winter looks something like that, or in the morning as well looks something like that, and in the afternoon
we don't see the images.
It will look like that. You don't see the images?
No, we see only the first image.
This one you don't see at the moment, the color?
No.
Oh, how strange.
We see the historical photo.
We're still in the first image.
Sorry. Okay. Disconnect you for a moment. Sorry. No, share screen.
So Zvi, you often
Yes.
take your students to this area when you are in Berlin, right?
First of all, of course, because this is the very important IBA area, and all the interesting experiments of this IBA, all the disasters, maybe one can say, are exactly in this area. So this building is not exactly part of IBA, but it's immediately after, really stands out as maybe the most significant building of Berlin, I would say, in the 90s, or I would say the last decades of the 20th century. This would be Berlin's iconic building. It looks nothing like those postmodern blocks around it. And it's quite amazing because it was the first significant building of a very young firm at the time, the Sauerbruch Hutton.
You seeing this again, as we? Is that,
yes, now we see it.
Yeah, is that okay? So I mean, this would be
that's perfect.
Yeah, the winter period. This would be in the summer. So I mean, in a way, the idea is that it's a kinetic facade which responds to the climate, in this case to the sun. But there's more to it. It's also a double facade. This is a diagram from the fluid dynamics simulations at the time, where we had to prove the fire rating and the fire concept in general. You can see how there's a kind of very narrow facade that goes all the way up the building, where the air heats up, and there's pretty amazing convection within that, like in a chimney, within that facade, which drives the ventilation. So when you open the window on one side of the building, and you open the building on the other side, you open the window into this what we call a solar flue. You creating a cross draft which pulls air through the floor slab and through the offices, and it provides a kind of, if you like, mechanical ventilation entirely without any mechanics, or I mean, just opening windows. Basically, it's based on natural convection. That at the time was a total prototype, and part of the reason why the building took so long to realize. It took 9 years to be built. But it's gratefully a kind of concept that is working very well, and is still being employed today, at least in the kind of intermediate seasons like spring and autumn, and at the moment the summer is so cold that it's also probably being used at the moment. But when it gets very hot, there's also a cooling system in the building, but it's a very it's based on evaporation of water, so it's not a very powerful cooling system, but there's some cooling, and there's night cooling. The building can be flushed with fresh air through the night, again through this system, and you can see the floor slabs are exposed, so the concrete is kind of getting charged with cool air over the night, and it inside. A colleague have his office in one of the floors.
So Matthias, there's a problem with your microphone.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Maybe, yeah. Sorry. As I was just saying, that the floor construction, you can see it here. It's made of prefabricated elements which span the whole width of the building. It's only about 11 meters wide, and the gaps were used to put all the installation that you needed, the sprinkler systems and electricity and all of that.
Matthias, what about heating for the winter?
There are normal convection radiators. You can sort of see it, I think, on this slide. Let me just see. Are there? Yeah, you can just about see. Oh, on the next one you can see very well. They're just radiators underneath the windows. A kind of very normal system. But let's put this in context. sorry. I'm just. I don't think I've got the right slide here. I'm sorry. It's basically at the time when you were looking at the kind of the life cycle cost of a building. We calculated that the construction of the building was only about worth 15% of the overall energy requirement that was needed to keep a building for 60 years well used. And the remaining 85% were all to do with the running, the operation of the building, repair, maintenance, and all of those things. So our objective was very much based in the idea of trying to reduce ventilation cost, cooling and heating cost, to not just cost, also energy consumption, to reduce lift circulation and basically kind of bring down the running expense both in terms of energy and also in terms of cost significantly down, in the hope to make a contribution to a more sustainable environment. And I will come back to this thought in a second. Let me just show you a last slide of this particular project. You see in the foreground a project by Aldo Rossi, actually one of his last projects before he died. And it shows an office building that is covering a whole block. It's also right in the center of Berlin. And it's designed in such a way as though it was made up, or it was actually a block of many small buildings that had the plot size of the 18th century Berlin. The 18th century Berlin, as I mentioned earlier, is about 3 stories, 2 stories and the mansard roof, sometimes 3 stories. So, I mean, half or less than half the height of these buildings. And here, this kind of plot size, which would be fitting for such small buildings, is kind of projected, extruded up into the 19th century height, the 21-meter parapet. And you can see how the roof line is kind of growing over those 21 meters still. And anyway, so the idea is to create a kind of a city that somehow follows the historic scale of its predecessing generations, and to suggest a kind of variety and also programmatic variety. But in reality, behind these facades, it's a continuous floor slab. It's you basically on one floor you can go all the way around the block. The large office floors that are rented out to largish corporations. And you can also see our building behind, which is kind of like this kind of wing at the top. Is really it's about wind support for the convection facade. There's a sort of Venturi effect which helps drive the convection facade, and the facade that I was explaining earlier, that is really responding to the climate as much as it is responding to the urban context. So I guess it's really an attempt to start a new kind of way of thinking about building in the city. And let me maybe leave it at that, and then I'll just try and find the last building that we were working on, or one of the last anyway.
Zvi, have you been to Berlin in this phase where everything was possible?
Phase, you mean what? The 90s?
After the war, yes.
Well, I started to visit Berlin more often in the beginning of the 21st century. I don't remember Berlin exactly after the demolition of the wall. The happy days of Berlin, no.
Yes. Well, I think for us as Israelis or people who live in a city in Tel Aviv, that Berlin is so exciting because it has so many episodes, no? Like so many, time slots where it had to reinvent itself. And as city planners and architects, there was a lot to do. And just to connect it to our topic for today, the day after tomorrow, I think that perhaps starting with this kind of project in the 90s is a little bit similar to the zeitgeist perhaps we are at right now, where we have to think how architecture responds to this era in the moment in time where it happened.
One has to explain that this really happened at a moment when Berlin was super elated. I mean, I happened to be in Berlin on the very day of the kind of 8th of November in 1989 when the wall opened, and that night and that week and the following, whatever, 2 years or something like that, were just so optimistic. It was like an unbelievable mood in the city, and everybody thought, I mean, everybody, including even, hard-headed clients and so on, thought that Berlin would be the center of, in Europe, would be a kind of great capital, and, everything would be changing. And so somehow everybody felt whatever we do now, we have to really contribute to this future. And that's how something like this project became possible at all, because Berlin is anything but very kind of known for its experimental, at least, I mean, post-war, I'd say there's not that much experiment really going on, except for these special events like the IBAs. And that a kind of normal housing association would commission an architect to do a building like that, and then stick through this choice and be loyal to us for nine years. I mean, the economy was going up and down, the kind of optimism was waning, and it was exceptional, really unusual, pretty impossible to think that something similar would be happening today. But let me just quickly talk about, show you this project. It's a competition that we won recently. Can you see what I'm showing, a figure ground plan? Yeah, great. It's in an area of Hamburg. It's the so-called City Nord. And City Nord, and this is a kind of aerial view of it, which is slightly out of date because there's still a few buildings there that unfortunately have been taken down today. Is a sort of, you could call it something like La Défense of Hamburg or something, except it's, I mean, much smaller and more provincial. But anyway, you can see it's again a piece of modernist urbanism, a kind of the thought of a business city in the middle of a landscape, which has been realized reasonably successfully. There still are some very nice buildings. You can see at the top there, this slab, there's an Anne Jacobsen building, which is absolutely beautiful. There was this kind of pyramid here that you can see in the foreground, which unfortunately has been taken down already. There are kind of notable buildings, as in Egon Eiermann building and other kind of German architects who actually did really beautiful things in the 70s. But it is, as you can see here, also this building, I can't recall now who the architects are here in the foreground. I mean, you can see it is very typically 70s architecture. And we were asked to take part in the competition for this comb building here at the bottom left, this kind of brick thing, which was built for the what's called the Postbank, the kind of saving bank of the German Post, which was once a state organization, and it was a center, a logistics center, where they had their computers and they were printing out the kind of bank balance statements and whatnot, administrative building, but enormously big. And you can see here it was like 70,000 or 78,000 square meters, and we were supposed to extend it. We were supposed to take it down and rebuild it with something that was 96,000 or nearly 100,000 square meters. And of those 100,000 square meters, 77 were meant to be office building, and in the existing structure there were 32,000 square meters of office building. So essentially, they were asking us to take down offices that were not even 40 years old, or something like 36 or something so years old, and to replace them with new office buildings. And here's the interior. I mean, this is, as I said, it's like the Post is like a state-run organization for a long time, not now anymore. It's now DHL, and it's all a private company. But I mean, it used to be sort of like a government department, and so therefore everything is extremely well maintained. Everything's very well kept and beautifully cleaned and everything else. And the interior spaces are not exactly sexy, and maybe they need a bit of renewal in some of the equipment, but in general they were kind of perfectly well inhabitable. And we had a in our own career, we had a sort of a big how should I put it, kind of learning effect in this project, which is something that we finished in, I think, approximately 2006 or some 2007. I can't remember exactly. It's in Munich, and it was an office building which is designed for Siemens Nixdorf, which at the time they were making computers, and it was especially designed for computer systems. So it had a lot of space, as it was early 80s. It had a lot of space for servers, because at the time, what you have in your laptop today, you needed a whole floor to fit the equipment. So there's a lot of superfluous space, if you like. And again, we were supposed to renew the facade, and we put all the kind of technology, ventilation systems and so on new, and also add another floor. So, and on the top, the two pictures you see before and after. And at the bottom, you see the existing structure, because the learning effect was that we decided to keep the existing concrete frame. And we replaced everything else. The picture on the right is an interior then of the finished thing. We put new finishes, we put new ventilation, lighting, electricity, everything, new facades, and so on and so forth. And then in the end, we kind of, in terms of, because we were constantly interested in this kind of issue of sustainability, in the end, we asked an engineer to kind of work out for us, because it's just out of interest, you know, can you tell us how much energy or how much carbon dioxide we saved by keeping this concrete frame? And they made a calculation, and they came up with an incredible number, which was that the equivalent of the carbon dioxide saved was equivalent of 35 years of heating. In other words, if you like, I mean, this is a little bit of a, what in German you call a Milchmädchenrechnung, is a little bit of a sort of illicit kind of calculation, but if you like, we were saving 35 years of heating by not taking down this concrete frame and converting the building. And if you think of all the efforts that we were making earlier in order to make the lighting more efficient, to extend the daylight hours, to you know, with solar protection, to make sure the heating, that the cooling systems don't need too much energy, and so on and so forth. The kind of margin that we would be achieving in those efforts are relatively minimal. You know, you're improving the performance by 80% or something, by 20% or something like that. But then you also have a user, and if the user doesn't really perform the way he or she is meant to be performing in the kind of logic of the building, then even those 20% are in question. And here, with the kind of simple measure, which is really just to do with architects' choices, we would be achieving the equivalent of 35 years of heating. And that, we thought, that is just really amazing, you know. And if you really are thinking about sustainability, and if you really are thinking, then obviously it's not just about the performance, and it's not just about energy consumption in the operation of the building, but it must also be about the construction process and the embedded energy in the material that you use for your basic construction. And having had that experience, we kind of looked at this building that we were supposed to be taking down and replacing with a new office building as something that we should possibly exploit for its existing qualities. And so we proposed to our client not to take it down entirely, but to, first of all, keep all the or most of the underground garage, which is absolutely enormous, but to convert it in half of it, basically, and then to kind of leave approximately 2/3 of the existing building standing, and to optimize the circulation within, and to extend it with timber construction, which is light enough so that the existing concrete frame could take the additional load. And this was this kind of story about the gray energy saving that I was just telling, that we were obviously introducing here as well. And then we proposed to add one new office building, which we wanted to build in the timber hybrid structure, or we still want to do that. And there's a residential component to the whole program as well. And so that in the end, you kind of have a complex that is quite, I mean, it's 100,000 square meters, as I said. I mean, it's almost like a small piece of city, like a small quarter, which kind of carries these kind of layers, even though we're just talking about 1 or 2 generations, really. It carries these layers of architectural intervention. And it, at the same time, as a side effect, it kind of opens up. You can see here in the footprint, the original one was very much designed as one institution, almost like a sort of Fort Knox type, you know, central control, central access, and so on and so forth. And we are kind of opening this up and dividing it into different office elements and different kind of working environments. And there's obviously a public component with restaurants and stuff like that, which will make it attractive to a degree, at least for people who are in the surrounding buildings as well. I mean, as it happens, there's a shortcut path as well to the next S-Bahn station to public transport. So it's kind of en route for quite a few people who come to the kind of center of this kind of strange agglomeration of what they call themselves elephants in the park. There's also a certain spatial logic here, which we are following, or we're trying to certain scale, and also a certain mise en scène, if you like, the kind of spatial sequence that we're trying to fit into. I mean, they have a kind of little hedge there built along the street, which is almost acting like a little model to the kind of urban proposition. It's quite funny in a way. And yeah, so and we are trying to pick up approximately the scale of the neighbors, and there are these kind of objects, this kind of housing as well, housing towers, which are creating certain clusters or certain kind of lines that start to make a certain coherent composition, even though they open a very kind of landscapey field. There's also, it's very close to the airport, which is a great advantage in terms of circulation, mobility, and so on, but it also makes a lot of noise. So we're trying to avoid the worst, kind of covering courtyards and so on and so forth. And maybe end up with, I don't need to explain to you all the kind of workings of it. Maybe just end up with this image that implies this kind of collage-y, we refer to it, wabi-sabi, as this kind of Japanese philosophy of beauty in a way which kind of is sort of in praise of the repaired, if you like, of the kind of imperfect, of the somehow contaminated. So it's a kind of 70s building, not the most beautiful, but I mean quite a solid building, which we're sort of extending with these kind of timber component, timber and glass, basically. The courtyards being covered over in order to protect from the noise from the airplanes, and sort of trying to bring a new spirit into this kind of institutional environment that would be more positive towards contemporary working practices. So I think at this point I rest my case and disconnect again from the from the screen. Are you still there?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Let me just find the...
So Zvi, do you want to start this conversation after what we saw?
Yes. I think that what's so fascinating in what Matthias has just shown us is that he's not even trying to present it as a humble attitude. For him, he takes it for granted. And for me, this is the future of the possible or the more optimistic future of our profession of architecture. And Matthias is there from long ago, from the 90s, from their very first project. They're always interested, for me, above other things, in what should be commonsensical for all of us. And this is, I would say, the ethical quality, the ethical architecture as an ethical praxis. And first of all, to me, as a technical and environmentally sustainable practice of building. And we are for too long seeing, and in Israel it's quite common, but also anywhere else, that we are part of the problem, not part of the solution, in the sense that we really participate in this party, this ongoing party of overconsumption, well, first overproduction, overconsumption, which is not only about goods, but also about space and so on. And one of the things that happened maybe recently with this epidemic, without really trying to foretell the future, but what we can see for sure, I think, is that there is a certain warning for us, or certain sense, certain feeling that we don't need so much. We overproduce. We build too much. We are bulimic in the way we produce architecture. And I think that what we could see in Sauerbruch Hutton's projects from the beginning is that even though there is nothing really humble or minimal or minimalist in the gestures, there are always very significant architectural gestures. They're very much, you know, architects, but there's always an attempt to find solutions that are, as I said before, ethical in the sense that they would try to reduce the carbon footprint, or to reduce the expenditure of energy. The data that was brought here, I don't know how much our audience is impressed, but I'm extremely impressed with the numbers, the ability of an architect to take decisions that save. It's not only so much money and energy, but it's also to reduce so much on pollution. You know, the decision not to destroy such a huge building means also that we save on debris, on pollution. This is a huge amount of debris. You know that the biggest problem of debris, of building debris, of building garbage, of garbage in general in the world is building debris. And if we can save on it, it should be, to me, always our first choice. This should be also almost the default. And we can hardly see architects that would take it as their first choice. And I think that not only it's essential to follow this kind of attitude, it's also much more interesting. It's always, for me, also as a teacher of architecture, so much more interesting to reinterpret, not only to reuse or reframe existing structures, but also to reinterpret them. There's so much more architectural activity there than to build new structures. So this would be my first reaction to Matthias's presentation. Sharon.
Yes, I'm sorry, Matthias, just because I know Zvi likes the German terms sometimes. I just heard a new term, and Matthias, tell me if this is what you're doing. It's Umbaukultur, which is, we always talk in Germany about the Baukultur, no? The building of culture,
Correct, yes.
Something that we want to adapt in Israel. And here we're talking about an Umbaukultur, which of course is very valid, because even if the corona will go away, the climate change crisis is here with us to stay, no? So in this kind of hubris of us architects and over planning, I think is really the call of the hour. So thank you, Matthias, for that. And
yes, I would just like to follow on from what Zvi was saying. I mean, I think if we go back to, I mean, it's like a funny coincidence now that showing the first and the last kind of work, this kind of Iber, or let's say the kind of Aldo Rossi, I mean, his book was published, I think, in 1967 or something like that. And it was obviously a reaction against the Charter of Athens and the kind of modernist idea of separation of functions into different parts of the city and the dominance of the motor car and mobility in general and so on. But it also, in a way, somehow reflects this kind of exclusive attitude, in that it is doing the opposite, so to say. It's saying, well, there's a European tradition that we in northern Italy, for example, we have the full Bologna is full of arcades, and the arcade is a kind of urban typology that we should kind of continue into. And so then he builds Galaratese, which is a kind of housing estate at the outskirts of Milan. There's no kind of street anywhere to be seen. There's no shops. There's nothing that would normally make up a nice arcade, but he kind of produces a beautiful building which has a sort of public space that is kind of within the building that is an arcade. And then this was translated, and then of course he is an Italian. He has this sort of elegance and also the kind of humor and somehow inconsistency, if you like, that kind of makes it all very interesting. But then this kind of gets translated into Germany, and there's obviously Germans are slightly different, and there's a sort of
Matthias, we couldn't hear you. I'm sorry. The last sentence was not heard.
Okay, it comes and it all turns into it's not just a kind of, it's not just a cultural or intellectual, it sort of becomes like not ideology, but certainly a kind of firm idea.
So unfortunately, we cannot hear you.
Let me, Sharon, if I may,
yes,
follow up on Matthias's comment, and maybe it has something to do with what he wanted to say. Just a word about the meaning of context, or the changing meaning of the overused term context. You know, Aldo Rossi is a certain kind of context, of kind of postmodernist historicist context, in a very literal way, trying to fit in the old city fabric. But the context we work in architecture, and this is what's so interesting in the work of Sauerbruch Hutton, is a much larger, is a much more complex context. It's a global context, first of all. It's environmental, it's climatic, it's cultural, it's technological. It has very little to do with this kind of historicist, nostalgic ideas. It also, by the way, Sharon, I know that it's a topic dear to you, so I will not provoke you too much, but it also has very little to do with preservation. It's not about preservation. They don't preserve the 70s buildings because they have very specific value, because they're cute. No, they preserve them as an ethical almost position, but also as an economic position, as an environmental position, and that's very different. So it's about kind of reloading these structures with new meanings and with new content or new performance. But it's very different. It's a very different context from the one that we used to talk about in architectural discussions decades ago.
And that's very good. I just wanted to say I was so impressed by Jerusalem. When we were there at the beginning of the year, we were there for the first time, and it's exactly this kind of intense layering of different, and in this case, not just histories, but also kind of religious and cultural fragments that are somehow almost sort of crashing into each other, coexisting nevertheless, and kind of creating this intensity is incredible, you know. And why can't that be a kind of model for a kind of contemporary city full of its contradictions, but nevertheless kind of developing incredibly interesting coexistences, situations, surprises, and so on and so forth. And that, I mean, you know, that's something. I mean, Jerusalem was never kind of, well, it was actually, but I mean, at least in the last decades or centuries, it was kind of repaired, added to, extended, built over, and so on and so forth. And I, given the situation, I mean, I think that is the kind of cultural conditions that we are facing in cities, and that's also the one that we should explore. And as a matter of fact, we are enjoying quite a lot, as Zvi was actually saying earlier.
Yeah, so just to kind of end this discussion with the crisis we are facing right now, you as an architect or as an urbanist, do you see already change happening in Berlin, in public spaces, or, you know, in the way we as planners think about the near future? Or do you still think it's too early to really talk about this subject?
It's really difficult to talk about it, has to be said. I mean, yes, we do observe changes clearly, but I mean, how lasting they are and whether they really leave have a kind of longer influence is kind of very, very difficult to predict. I mean, I can just say in the office, we've been in almost entire lockdown for about 12 weeks. So that means everybody was at home and working from home. It worked surprisingly well. Actually, we hadn't practiced it before so much, but it worked reasonably well. I mean, obviously the schools and kindergartens were closed, so those of our team who have children, they had their kids at home and they were in homeschooling or kind of like online schooling, which meant that they were at least half of their time was taken up, and then also having to deal with clients and architectural problems at the same time is kind of a big strain. And we have now, since about 3 weeks or so, we have now converted our office. I mean, just by spacing everything out, we have all the desks are spaced out, so we can somehow adhere to the 2-meter distance rule, and people are wearing masks, some at least in meetings. And we're still doing a lot of online meetings and all of that. So, I mean, working practices have changed. And this whole thing with the schooling in Berlin, at least, is a total disaster. I mean, thankfully, the school year has ended just now this week. Everybody's going on holiday now, but it's really very unclear how it's going to continue after everybody's returning from holidays. So then the other thing is that the whole cultural scene has been suffering a lot, as you can imagine. It's probably the same in Israel. The theaters have been closed, the concert halls have been closed, cinemas are closed, clubs are closed, and Berlin being so big on club culture, that's a kind of big deal. And of course, all of these people are they are kind of really at the fringe of collapse and insolvency and financial disaster. It's really terrible. Everybody's sort of trying to make ends meet and kind of try and find ways of carrying on. There's a lot of online activity. I mean, like the theaters, for example, are showing films of old productions. There's incredible. There's a Schaubühne, not the Schaubühne, Berliner Ensemble was showing a film that existed of a Bert Brecht, a play that was directed by Bert Brecht with Helene Weigel. Helene Weigel as a lead actress, Mutter Courage. I mean, they're absolute fantastic gems that are somehow coming out of the cupboard, and you can see them online. It's all for free. It's fabulous. The Schaubühne is showing their whole program. But I mean, obviously, it's not clear how this is meant to be continuing. The government is somehow supporting people with some subsidies, but it's not going to last forever. And the problem is that the pandemic is still there, and it's in reality is unchanged. I mean, it's now the summer is here, and people are more outside, and so the infection rates aren't so high. But essentially, nothing has really changed, and the question is, how much longer is this going to last? And there's a certain insecurity in anything everybody does, and so it's a strange, very strange situation. And in general, there's more. I think rules have become so important, you know. And if you go, some of the museums have opened up again. And you can go and see an exhibition, but you have to adhere to endless rules. I mean, there are no more than 2 people in one room, and you have to have your mask on, and you have to disinfect your hands, and you have to not be going against the kind of one-way flow that is going through the museum, blah, blah, blah. And there's then also a lot of people who love administering those rules. You know, the museum guards turn into kind of prison wards who kind of bark at you when you're kind of looking at the painting from the wrong side, and I don't know what. And there's a sort of change. It's also in public space. I mean, I don't know whether you read this in the paper. We had 2 nights ago, there was a kind of very, very strange occurrence in Stuttgart where all of a sudden some kind of party crowd, you know, because the clubs are closed, so people are partying in the parks, which is sort of allowed at the moment now. And they were starting all of a sudden to attack policemen because there was somebody who was controlling somebody for drugs. So then the crowd was attacking the police, and they were beating a retreat, and then these people were kind of carrying on, and they're totally destroying a shopping street and smashing shop windows and wild violence, and then extra police had to come in and blah, blah, blah. So there's a sort of, I don't know, there's a certain unease. I don't know whether it's to do with Corona or not, but I mean, it's the public space somehow is being renegotiated. One sort of feels. Also, people are not using the underground because they're afraid of infection, or not as much, and so on and so forth. It's very strange. On the positive side, everybody's on a bike at the moment because the weather is so great. So there's a lot more bike traffic. Car traffic has not increased so much. And also, I mean, the home office has the advantage that people are much more relaxed because they don't have to travel so much, and so on and so forth. So it all has its positive sides as well. But underlying it all is this kind of strange insecurity of one doesn't really know what's happening, how is it going on, and how is it going to end, you know? What's it like in Tel Aviv?
Matthias.
Yes.
If you are, I know it's against your nature, but if you are to speculate for a moment, about architecture itself, about our own practice, would you say, or would you hope that we'll see more architects taking responsibility or taking more care in designing more sustainable structures? In short, more architects like you.
Again, a very difficult question to answer. It's certainly, I mean, the debate about sustainability certainly has gained in currency. And the observation that you made, Sharon, earlier, that the corona crisis will hopefully recede at some point, but the climate crisis will still be there, and we really have to kind of haven't got many answers how to deal with that, is absolutely right. And so therefore there is this debate, and there are also quite a lot of colleagues who are trying to build buildings that are responding to this request of reduction, if you like.
In Germany, possibly more than in any other place.
Well, Austria, Switzerland are also very. Switzerland is probably the most advanced with their so-called 2000 Watt Gesellschaft, the 2000 watt society, which is suggesting that everybody has a certain energy budget which he or she can use any way he wishes, but it's limited, and you only have to 2,000 watts that you can spend per year, and you can trade it if you like. It's a strange thought experiment which is not really being put into practice. But for example, the city of Zurich is already designing its legislation accordingly. That's much more radical than in Germany. But I mean, at the moment, for example, the Green Party, which obviously has been the political force that has always been in favor of the so-called Klimawende, the kind of change of basically energy production of in Germany from coal to renewable energies. They're gaining hugely in popularity. So people really do seem to be concerned about the whole situation. And I mean, I guess there's it's an obvious reaction if one sees what's going on. I mean, the fires in Australia earlier and so on. There are phenomena which kind of make you think that we have to somehow do something about this. But I mean, whether in all, I mean, if I look at, I mean, Germany in any case is only a small part of Europe, and Europe is only a small part of the world. And if you look at the global construction industry, the figures are pointing towards increase of consumption rather than reduction. The figures are also showing a totally unfettered use of concrete, which is obviously a very climate counterproductive material. Not that much has changed, I think, and I mean, I guess big players like China and the United States should really be following this kind of maybe European lead or whatever, or should kind of develop their own forms of sustainable development. But I mean, America is at dead loss at the moment, and China is still very sort of maximalist, if you like, in all their development. So I think it's still going to take some time. Or what do you think? What's your view, Zvi?
I'm not too optimistic, but at least the discourse, at least the way we talk about architecture, is beginning to change.
Yes,
I think it will take some time until we'll have, we'll be Switzerland.
Yes, thank you, Zvi and Matthias, for this wonderful talk and for this insight. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, but I just feel that now it's really starting to, be very valid and very connected to the topic that we're facing. but unfortunately we'll have to do this conversation another time.
Tell me, Sharon, before you say goodbye, tell me a few words about Tel Aviv. I mean, what's the situation there? I mean, how are you all surviving there?
Well, I think that it's similar to Germany in a lot of ways, but I feel that Germany is perhaps, I don't know, I feel that perhaps that this public space is used different in Germany than in Israel. I see a lot of really protests going on in Germany that I see here, but not so, I think, bottom up as it is in Germany. I mean, I just saw in Kreuzberg, they're like going with Schlauchboote, with like little boats on the river, and protesting from the river and things like that. And I find very exciting that, the public space is starting to act not only as a commercial scene and not only also as a communal way, but really as something that the culture of the city uses to express itself. I find that here in Tel Aviv as well, but maybe not as harsh as I see it in Germany. And also, a lot of speculations, as I'm sure you're having in Germany as well. We just talked to the city engineer a week before to see what he plans for the city, and I think we all don't know yet. We all know that we are about to face change, but we all know that we have to be more flexible and fluid with our thoughts. But I guess drawing conclusions is something that will take time. But I'm sure that we as a culture have to have the ability to change and to sense the surrounding and the nature of the city in order to adapt to it, like you do very beautifully with your projects, Matthias.
Can you go to the beach?
Yes, of course, we can go to the beach. We also have to have the 2 meters, distance and the mast, but at least we have this, the heat island of Tel Aviv is dissolving on the beachfront, so we're lucky for that. Yeah,
great. Fantastic. I'd love to join you.
We're looking forward to it, Matthias. Yes. Okay. So yes, unfortunately we have to finish, but I would like you to join us next week. We have a talk about postmodernism by Dr. Jeremy Hoffman, who is the head of our research lab, and I think postmodernism is also a bit connected to what you showed us today. How to really, not everybody likes it, of course, and it's not like you say, Zvi, it's not cute, but I don't think it's about cuteness anymore. It's the values of our current situation have changed, I guess, and like wabi-sabi is not only fashionable, but also we have to think about, of course, the footprint of everything we do. So next week, Jeremy Hoffman.
Here, Louisa and Meira joining us finally.
Hey, Louisa's on the phone.
Hi, Louisa. Hi, Meira.
Hi, Louisa. Hi, Meira.
By the way, we are talking about the public space, but it's really about domesticity. It's the big time of the domesticity. And it's so pleasurable. I can't remember myself as domestic as I was the last several months.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure.
I mean, are you teaching from home?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So you're not traveling forwards and backwards all the time.
Not at all. Not at all. By the way, you also foresaw this, right? Because you placed your office long ago next to your home.
Oh yes, that's true.
So you know what you're doing. Good.
Well, I mean, that's obviously very convenient. So yes. we can go easily forwards and backwards. But anyway, it's very, very nice to see you all. Thank you for the conversation. And sorry about the hiccups. I hope it was still kind of understandable and somehow contributed to your talks. And hopefully see you in real, not such too long away a time.
Thank
Come
you,
to Berlin again. Yeah.
Yes,
ciao.
we shall. Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, Zvi.